General Hospital Spoilers teaser that Lois had always believed that the past could be buried. That the sins she committed in desperation so many years ago would remain sealed behind a wall of silence and secrecy. She had spent years convincing herself that the decisions she made were necessary, that the price of survival was guilt, and guilt alone. But time has a cruel way of reopening wounds we believed had long since scabbed over, and as whispers about Joe's true parentage began slipping through the cracks of carefully constructed lies, Lois knew with a bone-deep certainty that her reckoning was approaching. It wasn't a matter of if the truth would come out, it was only a matter of when. And when it did, the devastation would be swift and absolute. Dante, her son, the man she had raised with love and pride, would not just be hurt, he would be shattered. He would look at her not as the mother who guided him through life, but as the coward who concealed the existence of his own blood. Worse still, Tracy, ever the vigilant guardian of family legacy and the first to strike when weakness is exposed, would seize upon Lois's secret like a vulture to a carcass. She would condemn her with the full weight of moral outrage, and Lois could already see herself being cast out of the family she fought so long to stay connected to. What haunted Lois most was not just the fear of being found out, but the knowledge that she deserved it. Years ago, when her daughter, frightened and broken, abandoned her newborn son, Lois had a choice to make. But the weight of shame, fear of scandal, and dread of judgment paralyzed her. Instead of stepping forward to protect and raise her grandson, she handed him over to a system that offered no comfort, no warmth, no sense of belonging. She told herself it was temporary, that she would come back for him when things settled. But things never did, and days turned into years, until Gio had grown up alone, unloved, and unaware that someone with her blood flowing through his veins had the power to save him, and chose not to. Now, that choice had returned to destroy her. When Lois realized that Gio had uncovered the truth, terror gripped her like never before. This wasn't speculation or assumption. It was the dead certainty in Joe's eyes when they locked with hers across a crowded room, the cold silence that replaced what once might have been a spark of curiosity. He knew. And not only did he know, he understood. That was what frightened Lois most. Gio didn't rage. He didn't confront her. He didn't throw accusations or scream for answers. He simply watched, studied, and calculated. It wasn't the fury of a boy denied his childhood that Lois saw in him, it was the focused anger of a man planning justice on his own terms. She had expected Dante to be the one to lash out, to shun her in horror, or Tracy to take her down in a storm of righteous fury. But the real threat, the most devastating force of all, was Gio. The boy she had abandoned had grown into a man capable of exacting the perfect revenge. Lois began to unravel under the weight of his gaze. Every smile she forced, every attempt to maintain the illusion of composure felt hollow. She could no longer walk through Port Charles without sensing that at any moment, the floor beneath her might collapse. Every time Gio stood silently across the room, watching her, she felt stripped bare. He didn't need to say anything, his silence was an indictment. His presence a shadow of the guilt she had tried to escape for so long. Lois, who had always prided herself on resilience and strength, now found herself contemplating flight. She imagined disappearing before Gio could act, leaving Port Charles under cover of night, abandoning once again the people she loved. But what would that make her? A woman who abandoned not one generation, but two. And still, Gio watched. His plan was not impulsive. He didn't crave spectacle or violence. What he wanted was something far deeper. He wanted everyone to know who Lois really was, not the loving matriarch she pretended to be, but the woman who had turned her back on an innocent baby out of fear. He wanted Dante to hear it from someone other than her, for Tracy to see that her long-held suspicions were justified. He wanted to take away the respect Lois had built, the position she had reclaimed through sheer force of will. His revenge would be quiet, precise, and permanent. Not bloodshed, but reputation, honor, and belonging. Gio would burn down the legacy Lois had rebuilt for herself without ever striking a match. What Lois didn't know, what Gio himself didn't expect, was that his tightly wound plan for vengeance would begin to unravel, not through guilt, not through fear, but through love. Brook, intuitive and perceptive, noticed the shift in Joe's demeanor long before anyone else did. She saw the storm behind his calm eyes, the moments he lingered in the background of family gatherings without ever fully engaging. The subtle changes in his tone when Lois was mentioned. Brook, who knew what it felt like to be abandoned, to carry pain in silence, began to reach out to him, not with questions or pressure, but with presence. Her kindness was unforced, her understanding unspoken but palpable. In her, Gio saw someone who knew hurt and had chosen healing instead of vengeance. She didn't try to change his mind or tell him what to do. She simply made space for him to feel. Slowly, something within Gio began to shift. The outlines of his revenge lost their clarity. For the first time, he began to wonder what came after vengeance. Would humiliating Lois truly make him whole? Would tearing down her world rebuild his own? Or would he find himself standing amidst the wreckage, just as empty and angry as before? The rage in him remained, but now it was entangled with doubt. With the echoes of Brook presence and the quiet strength of her compassion. She didn't excuse Lois, she never would. But she reminded Gio that he still had a choice. That he didn't have to be defined by what was done to him. Lois, meanwhile, could feel the noose of her past tightening. Her nights were restless. Her thoughts consumed with memories she had fought to forget. She remembered Gio as a newborn, the weight of him in her arms, the moment she made the decision that changed everything. She thought she had buried that moment, but now it returned in vivid detail, tormenting her with the truth she could no longer suppress. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry for the boy she abandoned, not for the consequences she now faced, but for the pain she had caused him. She didn't know if she could ever earn forgiveness. But she knew she would never stop trying. And in a quiet moment, when Sunny, her childhood friend who had remained loyal through decades of storms, found her alone, shattered and afraid, he didn't offer judgment. He simply sat beside her. He, too, had known the cost of mistakes, the ache of failing the ones you loved. And without saying a word, Sunny reminded her that redemption wasn't granted, it was chosen, and fought for, every single day. Lois looked at him and realized she couldn't run anymore. If Gio chose to destroy her, she would face it. But if there was still a path toward making things right, even if it cost her everything, she would walk it. And Gio, standing at the edge of the decision that would define the rest of his life, found himself staring not at an enemy, but at a broken woman who was finally willing to face the truth. And for the first time, vengeance didn't seem like power, it felt like a prison. He had been trapped in anger for so long, he forgot what freedom looked like. And perhaps, just perhaps, walking away from revenge would be the most powerful choice of all. Brook had always carried her own share of scars, quiet, hidden remnants of betrayals and heartbreaks that had shaped her into the resilient woman she had become. She understood pain intimately. Not as a distant observer but as someone who had lived through it, bled from it, and clawed her way toward healing. That's why, when she looked into Joe's eyes in recent days, she recognized something most others might have missed. Beneath the composure, behind the polite nods and measured silences, Brook saw the storm. It was there in the tension of his jaw, the restless flicker of his gaze, the way he lingered outside of conversations without ever truly joining them. It was a familiar look, the fractured expression of someone standing on the edge of emotional collapse, consumed by something too painful to put into words. She could see that Gio wasn't just angry, he was wounded, conflicted, and teetering dangerously close to making a decision that could change the course of his life forever. It was a cold, moonless night when Brook found him standing alone outside Lois's house, cloaked in shadows and solitude. He hadn't knocked on the door. He hadn't said a word. He simply stood there, staring at the windows as if trying to will the truth to shatter through the glass. Brook didn't announce herself. She didn't ask questions. She stood beside him in silence. allowing the moment to breathe. Only after long minutes had passed did she gently reach out, placing a hand on his arm, not to stop him, but to anchor him. Gio didn't flinch. But he didn't speak either. The air between them was thick with unsaid words. And when Brook finally did speak, her voice was soft, steady, and full of hard-won wisdom. She told him what she had once learned the hard way, that revenge, no matter how justified it feels, never truly fills the void left by abandonment. That no public reckoning, no personal vengeance, could ever bring back the lost moments, the stolen love, the warmth of a childhood never granted. She didn't defend Lois. She didn't excuse the past. But she reminded Gio that holding on to hatred was like clutching glass. Eventually, it would only cut him deeper. Brook's words weren't rehearsed or dramatic. They were raw, honest, and soaked in the kind of empathy only someone who had been there could offer. Her gentleness wasn't weakness. It was a quiet force that wrapped around Joe's unraveling heart and pulled him back from the edge. For the first time since the truth had surfaced, Gio hesitated. The meticulously crafted plan for exposure and disgrace no longer felt like justice. It felt like destruction. And suddenly, he wasn't so sure he wanted to go through with it. Meanwhile, Sunny, who had endured a lifetime of betrayal and deception, had grown increasingly attuned to the subtle shifts in those around him. In recent weeks, his world had been bombarded with lies, from Drew's manipulations, from Willow's heartbreak, even from Michael's silence. The man who had built an empire on instinct could feel something unraveling. And that instinct told him that Lois was in trouble. He had known her longer than most, had shared a history with her that ran deeper than many could comprehend. And though they had long since drifted apart romantically, his loyalty to her had never waned. When he learned, through quiet whispers and uneasy glances, that Lois's darkest secret was on the verge of coming to light, Sunny didn't hesitate. He went to her, not as a savior, but as a mirror. He didn't promise to shield her from the fallout. Nor did he pretend to condone her choices. He simply reminded her that he saw her, not just the strength, not just the facade, but the guilt, the regret, the fear that had consumed her for years. Sunny had lived through enough betrayal to know the difference between malice and mistake, and he knew Lois's actions, while deeply flawed, had come from a place of panic, not cruelty. But Sunny didn't stop there. He also sought out Gio. Not with intimidation or threats, but with the solemn authority of a man who had spent his life walking the tightrope between vengeance and justice. When he stood before Gio, he didn't lecture. He didn't justify. He simply spoke. His voice calm but unwavering, full of lived truth and quiet pain. He told Gio that rage may feel like control, but it was a fire that consumed everything in its path, including the one who started it. Sunny had seen too many families destroyed by the illusion that revenge could heal a broken heart. He had made that mistake himself, more than once, and he had buried friends, lovers, and enemies because of it. Looking Gio in the eye, he didn't ask him to forgive Lois. He didn't even ask him to forget. He simply asked him to choose a future that didn't carry the weight of more regret. And somehow, that was enough. Between Brook's tender honesty and Sunny's weathered wisdom, Gio began to see another way. Not easier, not painless, but different. A path not fueled by anger, but by the hope that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to become the sum of his pain. Elsewhere, far from the emotional warfare simmering in Port Charles, Michael lay in a sterile hospital room in Germany, unaware that his life had become the centerpiece of yet another deception. He had never received Willow's visit, never heard the tremble in her voice when she asked to see him. He only knew that no one came, that the days passed in lonely silence. Willow, crushed by what she believed to be Michael's rejection, had returned home in heartbreak, unaware that her pain had been orchestrated by Drew. The same Drew who had once claimed to love her had bribed a nurse to ensure that Willow's visit would be concealed, fabricating a narrative that Michael had turned her away. It was a cold, calculated move designed to isolate Willow emotionally, to push her toward Drew's waiting arms, and to sway the court's view in the battle over Michael's parental rights. Sonny, upon hearing Willow's version of events, immediately felt something was off. His son wasn't capable of such cruelty, not the Michael he knew. And when he finally managed to connect with Michael by phone, the truth unraveled with agonizing clarity. Michael's confusion was real. His shock, genuine. He had never known Willow had come. That was all Sonny needed to hear. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with chilling precision. Drew had betrayed not only Willow but Michael, the court, and the entire family by manufacturing a lie that served only his interests. With the help of Jason, Sonny began a quiet but relentless investigation. It didn't take long to uncover the money trail, subtle transfers masked under false billing, discreet payments to a nurse whose silence had been purchased. Sonny, already on edge from the constant strain of keeping his family together, now burned with a rage he could barely contain. Drew's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was strategic, it was invasive. And it was unforgivable. Sonny saw it for what it was, a direct attack on the unity of the Corinthos family and an exploitation of Michael's vulnerability. This wasn't just about custody, it was about control. It was about manipulating a family already on the brink of collapse. For Sonny, the path forward was clear. He would not allow Drew to shatter what little remained of the Corinthos foundation. He would expose the lie, protect Willow's dignity, defend Michael's rights, and reclaim the narrative Drew tried to steal. He had faced enemies more dangerous than Drew and come out standing. And with Jason beside him and the truth on his side, Sonny was ready to bring down the carefully built empire of deception with one undeniable blow. And so, while Gio stepped back from revenge, while Brook and Lois wrestled with forgiveness, and while Michael began to piece together the truth from a hospital bed thousands of miles away, Sonny prepared for the storm. Not just the one that Drew would face in court, but the one that would finally cleanse Port Charles of its latest tangle of lies. Because in Sonny's world, loyalty wasn't optional, and betrayal always had a price. In Port Charles, the walls that Drew had so meticulously built around his reputation were beginning to crack under the weight of his deception. For years, he had carefully cultivated the image of a devoted father. A principled man, a pillar of the community who had emerged from personal tragedies stronger and more grounded. But with Sonny now in possession of the truth, the very truth Drew had buried beneath layers of manipulation, that entire image teetered on the edge of collapse. Drew could feel the shift around him. The wary glances, the sudden silence when he entered a room, the subtle withdrawal of those who had once stood by his side. The court of public opinion had not yet spoken. But it was clear that a verdict was forming. What made it worse, what stung more than any threat Sonny could pose in a courtroom, was Carly. Carly, the woman who had once trusted him with her heart and her future, now stood aligned with Sonny. It wasn't about rekindled romance, it was about integrity. When Carly learned that Drew had not only lied to Willow but had orchestrated her emotional downfall to gain legal leverage, it shattered something irreparable inside her. Carly was no stranger to betrayal, but this was different. It was calculated, it was cold, and it targeted someone she had come to see as family. Her trust, once given freely, was now withdrawn entirely. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lash out. But her silence, the refusal to look Drew in the eye, the quiet dignity with which she distanced herself, cut deeper than any confrontation ever could. And Drew knew. He knew he had lost her for good. As Drew's world began to collapse from within, Gio stood at the periphery, watching the entire spectacle unfold. One by one, secrets unraveled, facades fell away, and justice, however chaotic, began to take its course. Gio had imagined this moment 100 times. He had dreamed of the day when Lois would be exposed, when those who once dismissed his pain would be forced to reckon with their complicity. And yet, now that the moment hovered on the horizon, Gio didn't feel vindicated. He felt hollow. The satisfaction he had expected was absent. In its place was a growing emptiness. A gnawing ache that whispered that no amount of truth-telling could rewrite the past. Brook sensed the change before Gio even acknowledged it himself. She had remained close by. Not out of obligation, but out of love, steadfast, unwavering, and healing. When she reached for his hand, there was no urgency in her gesture, only quiet understanding. She didn't try to pull him away from the confrontation he had long planned. She simply reminded him, in the way only someone who has lived through their own share of darkness can. That forgiveness was not surrender. It was liberation. To forgive wasn't to excuse or forget, it was to reclaim one's power from the grip of resentment. She reminded Gio that by carrying the weight of the past, he wasn't punishing Lois, he was punishing himself. The clarity came slowly, like sunlight creeping into a dim room. Gio began to understand that vengeance was not the path to freedom, and justice without compassion would only perpetuate pain. He looked at Lois not through the lens of hatred, but through the eyes of a man who had been broken and was now trying to heal. He realized that if he continued to define himself by what had been taken from him, he would never discover what he still had to build. And so, with one last glance toward the house that held so many ghosts, Gio turned away. He walked not in defeat, but in quiet triumph, a man no longer chained to the choices of others. He left behind the weight of revenge, no longer as a weapon, but as a scar, a lesson etched into his spirit, no longer bleeding. Inside that house, Lois sat alone, surrounded by shadows and silence. The weight of years, the decisions she could never undo, the child she had abandoned. The pain she had buried, pressed against her chest like an anchor. She had tried for so long to outrun the truth, to cover it with bravado and denial. To pretend that the woman she had once been was someone else, someone distant. But now, in the stillness of that moment, she could feel the walls she had built begin to crumble. The silence was not empty, it was judgment. And yet, it was also the beginning of something else. When she looked up and saw Gio standing in the doorway, not with rage in his eyes, but with something softer, something infinitely more powerful, Lois felt her breath catch. She didn't see a judge or a jury or a punisher. She saw her grandson. She saw the child she had failed and the man he had become in spite of her failures. In that moment, Lois understood that forgiveness, if it ever came, would not be a gift she could ask for, it would be a grace she would have to earn. And for the first time in decades, she was ready. Ready to stop hiding. Ready to stop running. Ready to speak the truth, even if it cost her the last shred of dignity she possessed. Because finally, Lois realized that redemption didn't begin with others believing she deserved it, it began with her believing she could change. And when Gio turned and walked away instead of delivering the final blow, she didn't feel relief. She felt responsibility. He had spared her the devastation she had expected. Now it was her turn to prove that she was worthy of that mercy. Port Charles was still rumbling from the aftershocks of Drew's deception, Michael's recovery, and Sonny's quiet but relentless pursuit of truth. But amid the chaos, a subtle shift had occurred, one that couldn't be traced to a courtroom verdict or a scandalous headline. It was a shift in hearts, in relationships, in the silent battles fought in the dark. And in the center of it all stood a woman who had finally stopped running, a young man who had finally stopped hating, and the hope that even in a town as fractured as Port Charles, healing was still possible, one truth, one act of grace, one choice at a time.